So a few whiskeys from Hiram Walker. As I said, there's so many good whiskeys there. It's pretty hard to pick. The J.P. Weiser's 23 cask strength was a sad loss to this tasting. I thought about it, but so some of these are available. Actually, these are all limited editions. So with that, some of the standard whiskeys Hiram Walker makes are great. Try the triple barrel. Try the 15-year-old J.P. Weiser's. Try, pick up some of the limited editions. Really interesting. As you can tell, I've randomly pulled out a bunch of limited editions in part because they're so interesting. Lot number 40, I should say as well. It's a good, it's quite a good big Canadian rye whiskey. So lots to try from the distillery, and there's great reference points for what's made at the distillery. My website, insearchofelegance.net, you can find tons and tons of reviews there. So I want to start with an oldie. We have a Canadian club that's been that was distilled in 1973. So this is a 1.14 liter bottle, which I bought at an auction for about the equivalent of $30 a couple of years ago. Canadian whiskey's hit and miss on auctions, but I always sometimes we'll take a look, and if no one else is bidding, go in at the minimum, and every now and then you get lucky. So I got lucky with this one. So Canadian Club really was the foundational whiskey brand to Hiram Walker Distillery. This was Hiram Walker's whiskey itself, club whiskey. And it became huge. It's still, as far as I believe, the second biggest whiskey brand in Canada. So big brand. It was just huge in the 60s, and continued on. So this is 73. So this would have been around late 70s, early 80s is when this actually would have been bottled. The sort of character of Canadian Club hasn't changed too much in terms of what it's shooting for, in terms of a light, fruity, lightly spicy whiskey. But the whiskey certainly has. So this whiskey, it's really interesting on the nose. It's light, but you have a really, really nice fruitiness there, and it's kind of stone fruit. So, fresh peaches, apricots. I get canned peaches as well, and you still get a bit of spice as well. So there's a kind of real dry, kind of mixed baking spice to it, which is very, very nice. It's very classically Canadian. If we taste it. Actually, it's been a while. It's quite nice. It actually starts out, the rye actually hits you at the beginning. It's interesting. You get this slight floral, spicy start, and then you have it the palate kind of spreads out, and you get this sweet, light corn, and actually quite a bit of white oak. So vanilla and kind of freshly chopped oak, and then at the end, you kind of have candied fruit coming in, and more baking spice and a bit of oak and vanilla. Quite nice. It's very soft, not a lot of tannins, and a decent texture as well. Very pleasant, sweet, spicy finish. I'm tasting that now. Yeah, very nice. I like these old Canadian Clubs a lot more than the ones today. That being than the standard brands, I should clarify. So your baseline Canadian Club of in the 70s and the 80s was quite nice. It's still in a light, slightly sweet, slightly spicy style. So even though I like it, some people don't like that style as much, and it wouldn't do as much for them. But anyway, things change. So if we move on to something a bit different, and something that's very fun. Gooderham and Worts is a brand that started originally in the late 90s. It didn't really, it was trying at the time to emulate Scotch whiskey. So it had some malt whiskey blended in from Scotland, and trying to kind of hit the kind of Scotch drinker profile. And it didn't do that great. Lot number 40 was originally released as well in the late 90s. And so the brands were discontinued. But they were resurrected in the 2010s. And so Gooderham and Worts, when it was resurrected around pot still wheat whiskey, and was a blend of 4 grains, wheat, rye, corn, and malted barley. And it kind of became a brand that was built around blending. And so I think they've kind of drawn the product lines well in terms of Corby's whiskies, where you have Wiser's, which is sort of a corn and rye whiskey, and then you have Gooderham and Worts, which is all about blending. You have Pike Creek, which is all about finishing. So, putting a whiskey in a cask of a different wine or spirit type. And then you have lot number 40, which is all about 100% rye. So Gooderham and Worts, the standard Gooderham and Worts bottle, I would recommend. It's good. It's in the the $40 range. They started to release special release Gooderham and Worts, and they did this for a few years. And the second one, I believe, that they released was called Gooderham and Worts 11 Souls, and bottled at a higher percent alcohol, bottled at 49%, and was originally branded around 11 orphans that were picked up by Gooderham on his way over to Canada from the UK. And so it was quite a generous man. And is a blend of 11 different whiskeys. And if you talk to master blenders about the challenge of getting 4 different types of whiskeys right in a consistent blend, the challenge of getting 11 to work together well is really, kind of brilliant. And I'm going to have to read off some of what's in here because I won't remember. But basically, they use Brazetto rye, which is a specific type of rye that's being used in Hiram Walker. They used regular rye, they used malted rye, they used red winter wheat, barley, malted barley, and corn. And they used some that were just put through the column still once, some that were put through the column still twice, some that were put through a column still and then a pot still, and they were all matured in ex-bourbon and new oak. So a lot going on in this whiskey. If we smell it, it's very sweet. It's very luscious. You have really nice grain notes coming through. So if you think about some of the malty notes in beer, or you think about bread, that's all in here. And it's lifted with these sort of bright citrus and spice notes as well. And you have oak. And on the palate, the texture of it's amazing. It's really syrupy, not in the sweetness, not from a sweetness perspective, but from the texture perspective. And it fills your mouth. And you get really, really nice, like grain notes, like corn husk. Think about baking bread. You get light hints of rye that comes out in sort of dried flowers. And then you get this really nice backbone of spice, which plays well with some of the tannins that are in there. Beautiful whiskey. The finish is still unfolding in my mouth a bit. It started out sort of spicy, and now it's sort of slowly opening up, and the tannins are softening, and I'm getting more wood. Just a really, really pleasant whiskey, and it really is a testament to blending. Yeah, awesome. The Gooderham and Worts brands I I always like trying them. They're always really interesting. I think the wheat can be interesting. Sometimes when there's a heavy wheat, I've found that some people aren't as into that. I think though I'm a huge supporter of that brand. So let's jump to a few things that are a bit different. We'll start with an old Canadian club. So this Canadian club is 43 years old. And Canadian Club's been releasing a series of these 40-plus-year-old whiskeys. They started a number of years ago. Started with a 40 and then did a 41, then a 42, a 43, a 44, and a 45. And at times they've added some non-whiskey stuff into them, but they've been transparent about that. My favorite so far have been the 40 and the 43. The 40 was just a pure corn, as far as I understand, and it was just amazing. It was kind of the pinnacle of what you can do with corn and whiskey, I think. This 43 was really, really rich, from my recollection, but I'll taste it again. Yeah, it's just awesome. It's almost leathery. The really old corn whiskey has this really bright note to it that's really rich and makes other whiskeys sort of pale in comparison. So if I were to go back, the other two would taste worse. And it's something that I really notice judging competitions when you're tasting them all side by side and you get an old whiskey and it just blooms in a way that you might not notice by itself. And so I often get blueberry, but this one also has a really nice leather note. There's some soft fruits. It's quite subtle. The whole whiskey's very subtle. Yeah, and on the palate, you get these really nice dried fruit and spices. Supporting kind of a very light and bright corn whiskey. Very subtle. The berry notes are awesome. The finish just slowly unfolds. It really is quite the experience. One you really have to try. Maple as well is coming out in waves for me. Fascinating whiskey. You kind of have to try it. It is an interesting experience because some of these whiskeys they're quite light, and so as much as they're old, they're not necessarily big, punchy, flavorful, powerful. But the subtlety is amazing, and this is a whiskey I could sit with for a long time, and I would be very happy. Speaking of punchy, Lot Number 40 is a brand of 100% rye whiskeys, and it's quite well known. People really like it. It's a really, really good mixer for high rye cocktails, which isn't how I normally enjoy it. I would usually sip it. But they released a few cask strength versions of this, and they've done all kinds of stuff. They recently released a peated one, I guess it's a 100% rye whiskey that's been dumped into a cask that used to hold peated scotch, so it's not a peated rye, but it has a lot of peat character to it. I'm a bit of a traditionalist in some ways, and they've released a few old cask strength Lot Number 40s, relatively old. So this was a 12-year-old, released a number of years ago. One of my all-time favorite Canadian whiskeys. Just a really, really good set of casks. And some of the earlier Lot 40s were close to this age. They've now, as far as I understand, they're a bit younger, quite a bit younger. But they released this one, and it was, I knew right away it would be a winner before I tasted it. But if you smell it, it's just remarkable. You have caramel, you have these really, really bright floral notes. You get kind of lilac, you get tons and tons of baking spice, tons of cherry. And the palate just bombards you with spice. and fruit, and kind of light herbal notes as well. There's a really nice oak integrated, nice caramel. The finish is just unfolding, like as much fruit as you could possibly think, as much spice as you could possibly think. And it all works together. It's all balanced. It's all refined. It's beautiful. And the finish on this one will be with me well after I finish this video. I should note this is a cask strength version, so this is 55%. Yeah, just an awesome. So if you have a chance to taste the cask strength Lot 40, do it. Especially if you can get one that hasn't been put in a cask. Some people do like the finished Lot 40s, but just to taste a bit more rye and a bit less cask is really amazing. So I've had 4 really good whiskeys. Hopefully it's given you a bit of a taste tour of Hiram Walker Distillery. I'm a huge fan of a lot of what they make, and so yeah, explore it and try it. It's yeah, they make good whiskey there.